find out
Hello.
if we're expecting an assistant judge.
Second speaker, Aria Lera. Third speaker, Maya Eden. And our reply speech will be done by Michaela Matt. On the opposition, we have Singapore, with first speaker as Natalie Morris, second speaker as Peggy Powell, third speaker as Jonathan Klug. Sorry.
Okay.
And the reply speech will be done by Natalie Morris. We'll now call upon the first speaker from the proposition, Michaela Matt.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start off by discussing a disease that infects all of the world today, which is cancer. Now, when you have a cancerous tumor in your body, there are two ways to get rid of it, theoretically. One is to put a wall around it so it cannot expand to the entire body, and the next is to simply exterminate it. We are going to show you in this debate, in relation to the topic today, why exterminating it, why using the death penalty can be justified. Indeed, the motion is that the death penalty can be justified for crimes such as mass murder and war crimes. What we are trying to show you in this debate is that this is for the point of justice, and this is also to benefit society. Now, in this case, what do we have to prove to you? We have to prove to you that it can be justified. We would like to emphasize the words "can be." Because of the murder's violation of rights, and because we still need to protect society, to console society,
Point, madam.
no thank you, and because of the unjust violation of the victim's right for emotional stability. Now, because of these three things, we believe that the death penalty can be justified. Now, the truth is that only one of these things needs to stand at the end of the debate to show you that it can be justified. However, we will prove to you that all three indeed do justify the death penalty. And even if, in one case, theoretically, in the entire world, this could be justified, like in the case of, for instance, Holocaust war criminals, we are saying that it should not be necessarily implemented as a policy for everything. However, in certain cases, and for certain reasons, this can be justified. So how are we going to show you this today? First, we are going to show you, on the level of the criminal himself, why this is justified. Then we are going to show you why on the level of society this can be justified. And then furthermore, we will show you why on the level of the victims of the crime, it can be justified. So we start out indeed with the first, the level of the criminal himself. I would like to start off by describing something that is called a social contract. In society, if a citizen violates rights, then society has the right to take rights from him. If an individual does not respect the laws, no thank you, that society has set out for him, if he violates certain rights of other people, or if he violates laws that set out and agreed upon, the government can take away rights from him. We see this, for instance, in you receive a fine, no thank you. In drug trafficking, you receive imprisonment. Now we are showing you, no thank you, that for the crime that we will show you is the most extreme, it deserves the most extreme punishment. Now, why is murder worse than all of these? Why does murder indeed require the most extreme punishment from this social contract? Because when a murderer commits his crime, he is taking away all of the rights of a person. He's not taking away their physical well-being, or maybe violating their sexuality, or other things like this. He is taking away, yes please.
Similarly, with the death penalty, you'll be undermining the universally recognized right to the sanctity of life.
This is true, but once a person has showed, time and time again, that he does not respect this right of life that is so universal. We are talking about people that have committed mass murders. We're not talking about an accident. We are talking about people that simply do not, no thank you, that simply do not respect the right of life. What is this showing? That this person simply does not deserve to be part of our society. This person does not deserve, his right of life has simply been canceled out. He has taken away everything from this person. Finally, completely, the most basic right they have, the only essential right that people have. People can live in jail, no thank you. But once they have been killed, that's it. This person his entire rights have been taken away, and therefore, no thank you, they do not live, respect life.
Point, madam.
No thank you. No, because we have proved that the social contract exists, and that murder is worse than all of these crimes, because it is so extreme. This murder, indeed, does not deserve this right to live, and the death penalty can be justified. So after we have showed you that for on the level of the criminal it can be justified, because of this retribution that we need to give him, that we are required as a society to give him, we will show you why on another level, on the level of society as a whole, the death penalty can be justified. Now the rights of society have to be put before the rights of this criminal. Why? Because this criminal, as we have shown you, has rights, his rights have to be taken away by society because of this social contract. So therefore, we have to put the rights of society, who have not violated, we have to put the rights of society above. And we will show you that these rights include the right for a safe society where we deter future crimes, the right for a safe society where we protect society from these criminals, no thank you, and the right for a society that can move on after horrific crimes against an entire nation, against an entire race. So we move to the first reason. The first reason that society has a right above this criminal. This is deterrence. Now, we cannot prove what exactly goes on inside the mind of a criminal, because indeed this mind has been contorted and, as we have shown you, does not deserve to live. We cannot explain to you exactly what goes on in his mind. We will prove to you logically and through examples in the past that the death penalty deters murders more than any other punishment. No, thank you. Now, logically, let's think about this. The worst punishment that a murderer knows that a potential criminal knows that he will receive, the less likely he will be of committing this crime. Now, it's more scary. You know that you also will lose all of your complete rights. There is no chance of escaping when you are dead. Now, we have seen this, for example, in Utah, which is after each execution has been proved to prevent 18 more crimes. In addition, no thank you, in the years 1976 until 1998, there has been a drop in murders in the months following these executions. Indeed, deterrence proves itself in action. We see that because they know that their punishment is going to be worse, indeed, they have a less chance of committing this crime. This is necessary to provide for society. Now then we talk about protection. We need to worry about the protection of society. This criminal is gone for good once we give him the death penalty. The problems with jail, for instance, are that the criminal can escape. Often there is chances of bail, and often there are not enough years, so when this criminal comes out, he is still a danger. Now, criminals leave under punishments after being tagged as criminals. They are still in the mind of being a criminal. They are not taken out of this mind when they are put into jail. Death penalty is the only way society can receive 100% protection, that this criminal will not endanger their lives anymore. And it is essential that we provide society with this right for protection, because they have not done anything wrong. The criminal is the one that did something wrong. And when we talk about war crimes in general, society needs to be consoled. When crimes against a nation, society needs to be consoled of these horrible things that have been done to them. Now, because we have proven to you that the individual committed this extreme crime, and because of the social contract, they do not deserve a right to live, because society should still receive the rights that they deserve, such as protection, being prevented from future crimes, and be consoled after war crimes, the death penalty indeed can be justified because of these reasons.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning. I may be idealistic, but I would like to believe that we live in a civilized society whereby the brutal reality of the death penalty does not have its place. Now, in today's debate, we will show you that building a wall around this cancer of crime will indeed be more effective than completely eliminating it because of the concomitant detriments that will accrue. Now, let me deal with three main ideas that the side of the proposition has brought up today: the notion of retribution, deterrence, and the easy way out. Notion of retribution. Basically, make a definitional clarification. They said that the death penalty is only used in the notion of mass murder and war crimes. But we'd like to tell you that this is unnecessarily limiting the scope of today's debate, because the death penalty is also applied in other circumstances and other crimes that accrue. For example, homicide and armed robbery. And we have to take into consideration these notions and these crimes where the death penalty is also applied in order to account for a reasonable discussion in today's debate.
Point of information, please.
Now, basically, they have told us today that when you murder someone, when there is a violation of this right, the state is then sanctioned to carry out murder in their own way, because they seem to believe that two wrongs make a right. But no, ladies and gentlemen, in my speech later on, I will be talking about the universally recognized notion of the sanctity of life and how this cannot be undermined under any circumstance. So, ladies and gentlemen, no thank you, on to deterrence. Now, basically, they told us that when you institute the death penalty, there will be of deterrence instituted, but gave us no whatsoever, and simply quoted us statistics, which I can quote right back at, ladies and gentlemen. But first, let me give you some logic behind these whole notions. Let me tell you first, we have to understand the situation under which crimes are committed, whereby the majority of crimes that are committed today are called crimes of passion, whereby, for example, we see that 73% of crimes are committed under the influence of drugs and alcohol, and this invalidates the whole principle on which punishment is based, whereby criminals are able to rationally weigh up the consequences of their actions, as well as the notion that they might be punished and apprehended and punished. And in fact, ladies and gentlemen, before I move on to my example, I'll take your point.
When we are discussing mass murder, this is not a logical situation that every single time he was under the influence of alcohol or in war crimes.
Madam. But first of all, I will deal with that later. But first of all, let me talk about how in the general situation, whereby the United States, there's been virtually no change in the overall murder rate since 1976, when the death penalty was reinstated, despite an enormous increase in the number of executions. And with regards to your whole notion of mass murders and genocides, ladies and gentlemen, later in my case, I will talk about how, in fact, in The Hague, they say that because of the principles that are violated with death penalty, that is why they have, by constitution, they are ruled that they're not allowed to employ the death penalty, even when we're talking about mass murder and genocide. But last of all, ladies and gentlemen, the whole notion of the easy way out. Now, they have told us today that because criminals can escape, because they can have bail, because there's no change in their mindset, we therefore are simply acknowledge the fact that we can institute the death penalty. But they have not taken into consideration the reality of today's situation, whereby there has been a change in mindset of the whole criminal accountability system, whereby there's trend towards rehabilitation, whereby people like Sarah Faye Tucker, who, although the death penalty was important on her and she died in the end, she indeed had some form of rehabilitation and she was regrettable about her actions. Ladies and gentlemen, they talked about consoling society. Now, we say that the death penalty cannot be justified, but this does not mean that criminals will not be held responsible for their crimes. But instead of the death penalty and their concomitant detriments, we say there are better alternatives like life imprisonment with possible parole pending review of conduct, as well as counseling and rehabilitation. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, we are not looking for some further clarifications. We're not looking for perfection in the judicial system, but because of the irreversibility and finality of the death penalty, it magnifies these flaws in the judicial system, which we will go on further to talk about. And last of all, although we do not stand for the death penalty, ladies and gentlemen, there are other active measures to combat crime, like increased policing and education, which we indeed believe will be more effective. In fact, today, we will prove to you that the death penalty undermines the very aims of justice. And on my speech, I will be talking about the violation of fundamental human rights, while my second speaker will be talking of how it magnifies the endemic flaws in the judicial system. And together with John as a team, we will prove to you that today's motion cannot stand. Ladies and gentlemen, on to the whole notion of the violation of fundamental human rights, under which I have two main points. How it is degrading treatment, as well as the right to the sanctity of life, which is undermined. Now, first of all, we have a right, criminals as well have a right from degrading treatment. In fact, this is upheld by South Africa's Constitutional Court, which has concluded that the death penalty is an infringement of the right to avoid cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. This is similarly upheld in the Civil Covenant, Article 7, because with the death penalty, yes, madam,
you have simply not proven why this cruel treatment does
Yes,
not apply to war criminals and mass murderers.
Now, madam, please stop limiting today's debate to war criminals. Even
Point
when
of information.
sit down, everyone, please. Even when we're talking about these war criminals, we're talking about the intense physical pain that you institute on criminals like Barry last-minute struggles to find a workable veil. And with hanging people, you're actually relegating themselves to strangulation. And because of this undermining of these fundamental rights, ladies and gentlemen, how can we then justify the death penalty? And now on to my second point about the sanctity of life, which is upheld in Article 3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in Article 6.1 of the Civil Covenant, and Article 6.6 of the Civil Covenant, ladies and gentlemen, which the death penalty obviously infringes. Now, the sanctity of life is the foundation on which all other rights are based, and we say that under no circumstance can we violate this sanctity of life, because it is so fundamental to the notions of human dignity. Now, in fact, ladies and gentlemen, various states have recognized superseding philosophical consequences with the death penalty, where we say that even in cases of genocide, which they insist on talking about, the tribunals established in Arusha and The Hague are prohibited by their statutes from imposing death sentences. So, ladies and gentlemen, with state-sanctioned murder, the government is reducing themselves to the level of the common criminal. You're advocating bloodlust. You're advocating vengeance, the Old Testament notions of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And this can often mean, ladies and gentlemen, that you engender a cycle of violence, whereby we see the American Council of Justice has found a correlation between vigilante action and the regularity of the death penalty application, such that, ladies and gentlemen, California has exceptionally high rates of murder, despite the fact that they institute the death penalty, despite the fact that every 2 months they kill someone for killing somebody else. Now, because of the message that is sent out, because of the concomitant detriments to society, because you're undermining people's fundamental rights from degrading treatment, and because of the right to your sanctity of life, we say under no circumstance should we justify the death penalty.
Ladies and gentlemen, Team Israel find this quite amusing. We're actually debating the death penalty, and Singapore are actually saying that the death penalty should not be instituted. For example, in Singapore, the death penalty is instituted for the use of heroin. However, let's get something clear. We're not saying that this is justified in this circumstance. However, the motion states that this House believes that the death penalty can be justified. That means that all we need to prove that in some cases, even one case, it is justified. So, ladies and gentlemen, we don't need to prove that in every single case the death penalty is justified. That is not what we are trying to do. All we need to prove is that in one case alone would win us the debate. Now, they said that we're limiting the definition to mass murderers and war criminals. Let me explain to you again, ladies and gentlemen. We are saying in some cases the death penalty is justified. Therefore, we are not limiting the debate, because we are saying in some cases it can be justified. All we need to prove is that in mass murderers and war criminals, as we have chosen to define this debate, it is justified. So let's move on to what they have said. They have said, let's not use the death penalty. We should build a wall around these people. They said it is the violation of human rights. They said it's degrading. No, thank you. They said it is degrading a person. Now, what we are saying, and what my first speaker clearly said, was that when a person violates a certain right, he has a social contract. When he goes past that social contract, when he breaks the law, society is allowed to do whatever he wants to thank you. To deal with them accordingly. We gave you the example of a speeding fine. If someone is speeding, they get a fine. Ladies and gentlemen, for murder, you get the death penalty. That's what we are saying. We're saying it is justified. It is therefore justified. Someone takes away someone's ultimate right. They're not causing them physical harm. They're taking away their ultimate right. These people cannot live anymore. And when they have taken away that ultimate right, and on such a level, ladies and gentlemen, we are saying society is then allowed to take away their ultimate right. That is what we are saying today, ladies and gentlemen. It is not a violation of human rights, because these people have passed a certain degree. They have gone past, they have committed such a violation to society that we have the right to take their rights away. They have violated it to such a degree that society is therefore allowed to take away their ultimate right. They also gave us the point of sanctity of rights, and they said it's prohibited by states. And again, we clarify, we are not saying in every single situation it is justified. And to say that in certain states, actually, the crime rate has not lowered. We are not saying we cannot prove deterrence. However, we're saying logically, when someone is thinking of committing a crime, Yeah? Even we can't prove what they're thinking. However, logically, if someone were to think of it logically, they'll think that when someone is committing a crime, when someone is committing a crime, the harsher the crime, the harsher the punishment, therefore the less chance of him committing the crime. Yes, madam.
I put forward to you that as you yourself have admitted, you cannot tell what goes on in the mind of a criminal. Therefore, deterrence based on logical rationality.
Ladies and gentlemen, again, we clarify, we cannot prove logically. Yes, we agree, we cannot prove it logically. It's not even a question of debate here. No one can prove what goes on in the criminal mind. However, we can say what we think, what would be the normal thing? What would you think when you're committing a crime? You think the punishment is harsher than just going to jail. Ladies and gentlemen, the chances of you committing a crime are much less. We can't prove it again, but it seems logically. So now basically to review what my first speaker said. She said it's the victim's right. Again, once they pass a certain right in society, once they commit a certain crime to such an degree, they have committed a certain crime, and therefore society has the right to take away their point. So we said it's the criminal's violation. They have committed such a crime, society has the right to take away their right to life. And we gave you the point of society. There is a deterrent. Again, we can't prove it, but logically it sounds. And we gave you the example of Utah, where every execution prevents another 18 murders. And we said it's protection to society. We said since the death penalty, since the death penalty in England has been exterminated, 75 people have committed murders after being released from jail. No, thank you. Everyone knows that jail is a criminal university. Once you tag a person as a criminal, they're going to, when they come out, they're more likely to commit a crime. They are tagged as a criminal. You put them in jail, the chances of them coming out and committing a crime are much higher. It's protection to society. These victims have a right to feel protected, and when you give them the death penalty, that is the ultimate protection you can offer these people. They are victims of a crime. It is the ultimate protection you can give these people, because they know that this person can never harm them again. And we gave you the consolation. Why do people go and watch the murderer die? It's because it's a form of consolation. No one can offer them a full, perfectly normal life, but it is some help. It is something to give to these people when they have been victims of such a horrific crime. Yes, madam.
But we're talking about people like parents of Matthew Shepherd who have made public announcements against the death penalty because they recognize the cycle of violence.
Ladies and gentlemen, again we clarify, we're not saying in every single case it's justified. All we need to prove is in some cases it's justified. And we are doing this through our 2 points that I have already explained to you, which is the criminal's violation. They commit such a crime that therefore the society has the right. And we proved it through society, the deterrent, the protections, and the consolation. So now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to move on to my point, thank you, which is the victim's right, ladies and gentlemen. The murderer has committed a crime. It's versus the murderer's right who's committed a crime versus the victim's families who haven't done anything wrong. So ladies and gentlemen, what can we see from this? The murderer has committed a crime. The victim's family haven't committed a crime. So why should they be punished knowing that this murderer will go to jail but he'll be out in a few years? He's not getting the punishment. He's not being, no thank you, he is not being punished for the crime he did. He's committed such a horrific crime, he should be punished. It's the victim's right to go to know that this person, and to feel protected from this person, to know that this person won't be able to harm anyone else. They're such victims of horrific crime. They know that this victim won't be harm to anyone else. And we said they go to see the death because it's some help to them. Just even that small help is something to give to these victims. No, thank you. And also on the scale of a lot of people, for example, in the Holocaust when the Germans killed, the Germans after the war offered a lot of money to Holocaust survivors because of consolation. However, a lot of these survivors didn't actually accept the money. Why? Because they can't feel, there's no consolation, but we can give them something. Just knowing that this person won't be able to harm anyone else. No, thank you. Just knowing that this person will never be able to harm anyone else, and that will never be able to cause them any emotional pain, and will never be able to be in that society again. They're such horrific people. They've committed such a violation of society and such a violation of society's laws that they don't have the right to be a part of society. We have proved this. We have said that it's the victim's right versus the murderer's right. Victims haven't done anything wrong. This murderer has done something wrong. He has committed a crime. It's versus the victim's right to feel some consolation. No, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's see what we have shown you today. We explained to you what the criminal's violation of rights is. We said that once they go past a certain line, it is society's right and society's job, in fact, to take their rights away. They have taken away the ultimate right to life of this person, of their victim. They have taken away that ultimate right. No, thank you. They have taken away that ultimate right. They have taken it away. We're saying once they committed, so many times and to such a degree, society then has the right to take it away. Society is in fact obliged to take it away. They have the right to take it away. And we said society is actually put before. This murderer has committed such a crime that in fact it comes to the level where society's protection is more important. We gave you the point of deterrence. Again, we can't prove it, but logically it sounds right, because when someone is committing a crime, the harsher the punishment, the less likely he has committed a crime. For example, we can't prove this on statistics because no one knows exactly what goes on, but in Utah, ladies and gentlemen, the crime rates did actually drop by 8, a death penalty actually prevented 80 more crimes. And we said the protection of society, since the death penalty in England, for example, has been cancelled, 75% of people who, 75 people who have got out of jail have actually committed another murder. So it's a protection of society. Society has the right to feel protected. We said it's a consolation to a lot of people. We said that this person has the right to feel consolidated. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, their fact of the violating the human rights simply does not stand. These people have violated to such a degree. It's the victim's right to have that right to feel secure and know that this person won't be able to ever harm these people again. Thank you very much.
I call upon the second speaker from the opposition, Peggy Powell.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Now, what we've seen on that side of the House today has been a cop-out. Seeing that they had to justify the death penalty, the proposition then went on to try and overwhelm us with mass murderers, war criminals. But we didn't shy away, ladies and gentlemen, notwithstanding the fact that within their own case themselves, they used logic and examples that can also be used equally for common homicidal criminals. Despite that fact, ladies and gentlemen, and that inconsistency, we dealt with their case on their grounds and talked about principles that apply regardless. And therefore, no matter in what circumstance, ladies and gentlemen, we say we cannot support the death penalty. I'll show you this in two main areas. Firstly, this whole area about the welfare of society with regards to deterrence, protection and consolation, and secondly, with regards to the individual rights of the criminal. Now on the first point, ladies and gentlemen, deterrence to society. That's how the House tells us that they can't really prove it, but it seems logically to go somehow that criminals will be deterred by the death penalty when they themselves told us, ladies and gentlemen, that you cannot tell what goes on in the minds of a criminal. This applies for common criminals, where according to the FBI Mind Unit, 80% of common crimes are committed under the influence of drugs and alcohol, therefore cancelling out this argument of logical weighing up of the pros of committing the crime versus the cons of getting the death penalty. In the minds of powerful perpetrators of war crimes and mass murderers, ladies and gentlemen, this logic even more stands. How can you tell what happens in the minds of a power-crazed mass murderer, ladies and gentlemen? The logic that they themselves propose already defeats their own point. They tell us about the drop in Utah, which led to each criminal committing 18 less crimes, which in the first place has nothing to do with genocide. And secondly, I find it rather puzzling how they came up with this statistic. Did they go ahead and interview all the criminals and get the criminals to write a record? Yes, I will not commit a crime because of the death penalty, ladies and gentlemen. You see, the point is, they can't prove the correlation, and we don't claim to tell you either that not having the death penalty means that there will be no crimes, but we can show you that there is no direct correlation. For example, in the area between 1972 and 1976, when the death penalty was banned, we saw no corresponding drop in crimes when it was reinstituted in 1976. So don't you agree, sir?
No, sir. No, madam, I don't agree. Ladies and gentlemen, we can't prove that it's deterrence, and you can't prove that they don't think that. We're saying logically, it sounds that when someone has a harsher crime, when they have a harsher punishment...
No, sir. Deal with the point that criminals are not to be dealt with on this logical, rational evaluation basis. We can show you logically, yes, that there is no correlation. We can't prove a direct correlation, but we can show you that this deterrent effect is not, in fact, so significant that we would endorse the death penalty, as shown in the difference between the era in 1972 to 76, when the Supreme Court, USA in Farham versus Georgia, banned the death penalty as opposed to when it was reinstituted in 76. Now, they talked about protection, ladies and gentlemen. The point is, there is still criminal liability. Through life imprisonment, these people are still, in fact, prevented from causing harm to society. Ted Bundy, for instance, ladies and gentlemen, died in prison, and he was prevented from wreaking harm in society ever again. No, thank you, madam. So what they're proposing is, in fact, a defeatist attitude, where in panic, they terminate a potential life, when it's already proven to you that that because based on review, if someone still has a criminal mindset based on independent review, obviously he will not be released into society to create the kind of harm that they talk about. Now, consolation, ladies and gentlemen, even in Africa, where we see a large scale of abuse due to apartheid, the Truth and Reconciliation Committee has recognized that allowing for the death penalty only allows for a cycle of violence. Why? Because how do we pinpoint where the violence ends, where the blame stops? For example, with the Yugoslavia Tribunal, do you just indict the general? Or do you also prosecute every single soldier who came along and committed some scale of abuse? So, ladies and gentlemen, because we cannot draw the line, and because they didn't deal with the point on the spiraling into destructive violence, ladies and gentlemen, and because of the point that 4 out of 5 families choose not to go and see the kind of death penalty because it only creates more distress, not emotional closure, ladies and gentlemen, we see their points do not stand. On the rights of criminal, the second point, I tell you that once again we've told you that with speeding, yes, there is a social contract, but the point is when life and death is involved, the sanctity of life means it's not a simple equation where you can simply cancel out despite the degree of the crimes. Even if you talk about mass murder and war crimes, the degree of the crimes does not mean that we take away the rights of these people, and this has been upheld in legal precedent with regards to the Arusha Tribunal, with regards to the Hague Tribunal. Even in these cases, mass crimes, ladies and gentlemen, the degree doesn't mean that we stoop to the level of a criminal, and because 2 wrongs do not make a right, ladies and gentlemen, we say that your arguments of the so-called rights being taken away of the criminal do not stand. So now let's move on to my constructive. I'm sorry, sir, please wait for my constructive. And it's going to be about how you magnify the endemic flaws in the justice system because of the death penalty, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, because of judicial activism, and secondly, because of practical inequities. Now, ladies and gentlemen, judges and jury are not free from political pressures. Sometimes they sentence just to prove a political point, whether the sentence is deserved or not. For example, they want to prove a point that the state has a hard stance on criminal activity, as has happened in the state of Texas, where to prove that he is cracking down hard on criminals, George Bush deliberately appoints state judges in Texas with a hardline stance, therefore increasing the rate of hangings in Texas despite the average crime rates there. Yes, sir?
Again, we are saying that when a person commits a crime, it's not a form, it's a form of deterrence. We can't prove it, but again, we are saying that
yes,
these people
sir,
are
I'm
in the
sorry,
line.
I've already dealt with that point. Kindly deal with the constructive that I'm forwarding now. And my constructive has to do with the point that, for example, with the Maguire 7 in Britain, where because the courts were pressured by the government to prove that there is an active stance being taken against the activities of the IRA, they executed this group of so-called terrorists, the Maguire 7, but later on, the Innocence Project at the Benjamin Cardozo School of New York proved that these people were executed despite being innocent because of planted evidence. And so we say, since innocents get the death penalty for others to make political statements, it cannot be justified. Now, on the second point, on practical inequities, sure, they're competent lawyers, sure, they're complicated appeals processes, sure, there's expensive DNA testing, but the point is this appeal, these processes only apply to a privileged elite, ladies and gentlemen, and minorities who cannot afford it are at a direct disadvantage. For example, in the USA, where the average income of minority groups is less than $5 a day, but the appeals process takes an average of $2.1 million, ladies and gentlemen. We realize that these inequities, combined with the irreversibility of the death sentence, ladies and gentlemen, means an inequity in the justice system. In Indiana, despite only 3/5 of relevant crimes being committed by minorities, ladies and gentlemen, 18 out of 21 on the death row are Hispanics or blacks. This disproportionate ratio already shows you that the fundamental aims of equitable justice are being undermined simply because someone is poor and cannot afford to get the kind of justice he deserves. The stark truth is, ladies and gentlemen, placed in the same situation, a rich or middle-class Anglo-Saxon would get off, while a poor minority, black or Hispanic, would get the death penalty, ladies and gentlemen. Because of this unequal justice, ladies and gentlemen, we say that it undermines the very aims of the justice system. The execution of an offender is a miserable spectacle, both against law, against humanity, ladies and gentlemen, and against the very aims of the justice system itself. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, no matter what, it cannot be justified.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to start off by clarifying again what this debate is really about. The proposition did not come here today to tell you that capital punishment should be enforced all around the world for the various cases. we are not discussing the practical side. This is not a policy debate, ladies and gentlemen. This is a value debate. We are telling you that capital punishment can be justified, that in some cases it can be justified, even if we will be talking only about one case. But we have shown you a broader view. We have shown you a series of cases in which this can be justified, and I will address that later. But first, let's look at their points. I'd like to start actually by talking about their second point, which they addressed just now, the point about the judicial system, about how our judicial system is not perfect and sometimes it makes mistakes. Now let's look closely at what they're claiming.
Point, madam.
No, thank you, madam. They're claiming that we cannot justify capital punishment because sometimes the courts make mistakes. Now, what I think they're trying to say, ladies and gentlemen, is that we should not enforce capital punishment because sometimes the judicial system makes mistakes. But the truth of the matter is that by admitting that sometimes the judicial system makes mistakes, and sometimes innocent people get the death penalty.
Point, madam.
No, thank you. They are admitting, ladies and gentlemen, that sometimes our judicial systems are doing the right thing. And that sometimes, no, thank you, and that sometimes when the judicial system is not doing a mistake, then capital punishment is justified. Let's go over their second point. Their second point about the violation of human rights. Now, this point consisted of two parts. First, they told us that this is a basic right that cannot be taken away, that the right to life is so basic and so fundamental that we cannot take it away. But ladies and gentlemen, we have two answers for this. The first one is that these mass murderers and these war criminals have practically given up this right by committing these horrific crimes. They no longer have this absolute right for this. And then they addressed something quite interesting, that as a society as a whole, we don't have a right to take away other people's right. But ladies and gentlemen, they're proposing imprisonment. And we do this today as well. We take away people's right for freedom, ladies and gentlemen. This is something very common in society, to take away the basic human right of freedom, which some will claim is even more basic than the right to life.
Point, madam.
No, thank you. So if this would stand, the opposition could explain us the basic difference between the right to freedom, which they are proposing to take away, and the right to life, which for some reason they aren't willing to take away. But it is overall accepted that the society has a right to take human rights away in cases where crimes have been committed against them. Now, let me briefly review our case again. First, we spoke to you about the murderer's point of view, about how because these murderers have violated the social contract in such a horrific manner, ladies and gentlemen. Again, we are not talking about throwing bubble gum on the streets or whatever. We are talking about war criminals. We are talking about people who committed mass murders, who due to them many, many victims simply aren't with us anymore. And many families, which are still around, keep on suffering. And we're saying that in cases like that, when there's such a clear violation of the social contract, ladies and gentlemen, we have a right to take this right away. Then the whole issue of society. For some reason, while our society point consisted of three parts, they chose only to address one, and that is the one of deterrence. And while deterrence has statistics to here and to here, the basic logic remains. The criminal is taking a smaller risk when he knows he is not expected the death penalty. And what they told us is the following. Let's listen to this carefully. They told us that a lot of criminals, some percent of criminals, do not act logically. But then again, it will be a fallacy to say that all criminals do not act logically. And therefore, the initial logic behind this still stays for those criminals who do act logically. Please.
The thing here is the death penalty does not serve as a deterrent for war criminals and mass murderers because precisely then are we talking about irrationality.
Thank you. Now, I wish that would have been true, ladies and gentlemen. We all wish that the people that do these mass murders and these war crimes are irrational. But as a matter of fact, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of them are rational. A lot of them consist of such great amounts of people that some of them are rational. No, thank you. Even if we think of the concept of war crimes, we realize how many people this involves. Now, can all of these people be irrational, ladies and gentlemen? No, we are not saying to give every single soldier the death penalty. This is not what we are saying at all. But we are saying that to the leaders of these crimes, no thank you, which cannot all be insane, ladies and gentlemen, by no means, we should give the death penalty. Secondly, we spoke about protection. And they said, well, yeah, fine, protection, but also prisons can protect. But what we're actually saying is the following, that since these people, for normal cases, this would be true. Prison would be enough protection. But prison is not 100% protection. People can still run away from prison. No, thank you. People can still be bailed out of prison. But for these horrific crimes, ladies and gentlemen, and for these horrible people, we simply cannot take the risk. For these horrifying situations, we need an 100% solution. Now, they haven't addressed the issue of consultation at all, neither in our society point nor in our victim point. What we are saying here is fairly simple. That these victims and these families of the victims have the right to move on. These people who haven't done anything wrong and that are still awake every night knowing that the person that killed their families is still out there, is still alive somewhere, and may escape. Even if this is irrational on behalf of the victims, don't they deserve the emotional and psychological stability and well-being that we can provide to them? Do they honestly deserve to have repeated nightmares just because they know that the person who committed these horrific crimes is still out there? No, ladies and gentlemen. We tell you, both on the level of society and on the level of the victims, that these people have the right to move on, have the right to see something end, to see a turning point in their life, to see the end, and to start over again. Thank you very much, ladies.
Appealing, isn't it? And I would be swung if I wasn't so confused, ladies and gentlemen, because they come up here and they tell us, we're talking about war crimes. Only in that one specific instance of war crimes we're fine. And that's why they gave us the examples of ordinary criminals in Utah, ladies and gentlemen. That's why they gave us the examples of ordinary criminals in London. They haven't even given us a single case study, a single one. And yet when we repeatedly point out to them and draw out their logic from the very ordinary criminals both sides of the house have consistently talked about, ladies and gentlemen, they say, no. We are talking about war criminals. War criminals. Some anonymous war criminal, which we've never heard of, ladies and gentlemen, in the entire course of today's debate. We are talking about war criminals. And I'm again confused because they say, well, this is not a policy debate. That's what the third speaker says, ladies and gentlemen. And then they advocate a policy in a specific instance with some anonymous war criminal, ladies and gentlemen. And that's the broader view that the third speaker claimed that the proposition has, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, you understand that I'm a little confused. But I'm going to look at the two major issues, and I'm going to actually talk about war criminals, despite what the proposition claims they've been doing, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to talk about the philosophy behind that standing, and finally I'm going to talk about the practical consequences. So first of all, let's look at philosophy. We tell you that no matter what, which has been the fundamental contention of our debate, our line today, ladies and gentlemen, that if it's not ethically justified, no matter what kind of criminal you are, you cannot apply the death penalty in that circumstance, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let's talk about a new line advanced by the third speaker. She says, well, we're advocating restrictions on freedom. Yes, we are, ladies and gentlemen. We're not advocating that these people be entirely denied responsibility for their actions. But the question here is the difference of scale. And we tell you that when the international community or even a state takes away the life, of an individual, no matter what the individual has done, that has far greater philosophical and ethical repercussions, ladies and gentlemen, than if an individual were to take away a life. They're talking about a social contract. And we say, yes, these people do commit heinous crimes. It's dreadful. They deserve to be punished. But not in the way you say they should, ladies and gentlemen. Jeremy Bentham said, what's past is but one act, and the future is infinite. And we tell you to look to the future, away from the Old Testament vengeance and retributive justice, which that side of the house proclaims, ladies and gentlemen. We tell you that the communitarian philosophers pointed out that the state, let alone the international community, have responsibilities of moral leadership above those of an individual. That even though the individual may kill, that there is a greater burden on the state to refrain from that similar killing, despite the killing committed by that individual, ladies and gentlemen. We point you to the fact that the 1995 ruling of the South African Constitutional Court that struck down the death penalty had the nation's first Chief Justice, Ismail Muhammad, say, death is different. The dignity of us all must be offended, ladies and gentlemen. Why is death different? Death is different when the state undertakes it as an institutional mechanism, ladies and gentlemen. And we tell you that just because these people have committed heinous crimes, are we then justified in lowering ourselves to their level by sanctioning an institutional system of execution? Ladies and gentlemen, we tell you no, in alignment with a more enlightened approach to legal philosophy. The international community no longer allows the tribunals in Arusha and The Hague to apply the death penalty. They have been in the past, in the cases of Nuremberg, ladies and gentlemen, but we've changed away from that, and we are no longer allowed to do it precisely because the international community recognizes that we are a more civilized society now, we are a more enlightened society, and despite the fact that these tribunals do try war criminals, ladies and gentlemen, they still are not, and are bound by their statutes not to apply the death penalty. Yes, ma'am.
Recognition alone, you see, will not win you the debate because we have people recognizing for the death penalty and places in the world which death penalty is allowed. So,
first of all, recognition is exemplifies the shifts in legal philosophy which we are talking about. The shift away from the barbaric eye for an eye approach which that side of the house propounds, ladies and gentlemen. A shift towards a more enlightened, civilized approach that nevertheless continues to demand responsibility. And we say that's why death is different, and the dignity of us all must be offended, as this nation's first black Chief Justice, himself a victim of discrimination, himself a victim of a crime against humanity, ladies and gentlemen, Ismail Muhammad continues to uphold that when the state undertakes it, it's different. They say sometimes the judicial system is not making a mistake. Yes, that's true. Sometimes they do, and sometimes it's different, and they don't. But the point here is that they do often enough. And for the international community to validate killing an innocent, implementing it, ladies and gentlemen, on a large scale, we tell you that we can't bear to do that. So let's move on to my second point, that of practical consequences. This is very interesting, because here they say, well, in terms of deterrence, we can't really prove it, but logically it sounds right. And they drew their logic, ladies and gentlemen, from ordinary criminals, which is everything they drew their logic from, ladies and gentlemen. So I'll look at that. They say that we tell you that first of all, ordinary criminals tend to operate on an irrational level and commit their crimes in fits of passion. And even so, ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that as for war criminals, they are often so confident that they will not be apprehended and brought to justice that they commit the war crimes nonetheless. We tell you, despite the Nuremberg war trials, an anachronistic mechanism which was the last war tribunal to allow the death penalty to be applied, leading to the execution of Nazi war criminals in World War II. Stalin was not deterred from shooting dissidents in the gulags, ladies and gentlemen. Was Pol Pot deterred from massacring the Cambodians? No, not a single war criminal. Was Augusto Pinochet deterred, ladies and gentlemen? Look at it now. We have war tribunals which although do not retain the capacity for the death penalty to be implemented, we see a concrete shift by the international community away from Augusto Pinochet, away from Stalin, away from Pol Pot, and a terrible history, ladies and gentlemen, towards a more enlightened global moral paradigm. So we tell you that the deterrence they talk about, in the cases of the only examples they talk about, ordinary criminals, that doesn't work. War criminals, it doesn't work as well, ladies and gentlemen. And it's kind of late for a team that propounds to be talking specifically about war criminals, for them to bring up examples of war criminals, and instead wait for me to do it, ladies and gentlemen. They say, well, we need to protect society. We tell you, first of all, life imprisonment is only allowing release pending parole review, and you'll only be let out if you're rehabilitated. If not, you will serve out the rest of your sentence. So let's move on to the final point, on victims' consolation, society's consolation. We are fully in favor of consoling the victims' families. They deserve to grieve. They have had a dreadful, tragic loss, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why we're not saying we should totally absolve war criminals or any other sort of criminals of responsibility. But we tell you we'd rather do it through means that achieve closure rather than fueling bloodlust and a cycle of violence. We pointed to you the lynch mobs and riots outside hangings in penitentiaries, ladies and gentlemen. And I'll point you again, in the cases of war tribunals, to the lynch mobs outside the Nuremberg courts, ladies and gentlemen. So the point here is that what we want to do is achieve closure as a whole, but closure in an enlightened way, closure in a civilized way, ladies and gentlemen, because death is different. The state, as our moral leader, must be different. That's why the death penalty cannot be justified.
Ladies and gentlemen, we recognize today that the subject at hand is one that calls up a lot of emotional reactions. However, in evaluating the course of today's debate, we have to take a step back and take a clear, rational look at what has gone on. And what does this evaluation tell us? This evaluation tells us that today we have seen a proposition who's not even really clear what exactly it's talking about. They came up and told us, oh, we're talking about mass murderers and war criminals, and yet in their own case continued to propound logic and examples that didn't exactly prove the specific area that they were talking about. So we see that for today's debate, we have dealt with both the direct logic and also have brought in the debate to show you that yes, as they have called for a value debate, ladies and gentlemen, the values in today's debate tell us that the death penalty cannot be justified. And I'll be showing you this in two main areas as to what the issues for today's debate were. Firstly, on the specific issues of the criminals and the victims per se. And finally, in the second issue of society in general. Now on the first issue, ladies and gentlemen, they told us that the degree of war crimes demands the extermination of these people because of the extent to which they have given up their social contract. And they completely ignored the point on the sanctity of life, ladies and gentlemen. That it's not a simple exchange of rights that we're talking about when we talk about life and death. But what we're talking about is this fundamental principle that once undermined would in fact open floodgates to lead to a cycle of destruction and violence, which my first speaker talked about. That in fact undermines this whole case on emotional closure. Because when they told us about families going to see this somehow destruction of a person to make them feel better, we told them firstly that many don't even go to see these because of the emotional damage that accrues from this kind of traumatic experience. And that even those war tribunals, like the Arusha tribunals, the Hague tribunals, and the African Truth and Reconciliation Committee, which have experienced this kind of indignities on a large scale, have already recognized legally that the sanctity of life means that we do not justify death for these criminals, no matter what. Now, they completely ignored our point about vigilante action because of the message sent out by state-sanctioned murder. And therefore, they failed to deal with our point that yes, we want closure, yes, we want liability, but we don't want it in this way, this kind of defeatist attitude which leads to a destructive cycle, ladies and gentlemen. So now, let's move on to this whole point on society in general. And yes, they told us about the social contract, about the liabilities that one faces, for example, for speeding, ladies and gentlemen, which shows us that they failed to take into consideration this whole idea of scale, of the level of retribution that is demanded. And we tell you that precisely because of the irreversibility, which they themselves brought up and acknowledged, ladies and gentlemen, precisely because of this, our alternative of life imprisonment with parole based on independent review also provides for protection, also provides for deterrent, ladies and gentlemen. And on this point on deterrence, once they told us that's only a logical conclusion that all criminals will be deterred by the death penalty. Then when they found they could not defend that, they shifted to saying that, well, at least some people will be rational, and for these some people, we would in fact have the deterrent effect. But the point is, ladies and gentlemen, they couldn't prove directly that having the death penalty results in a certain number of non-deaths. we couldn't prove either that having no death penalty means a decrease in crimes. But that's precisely the point, ladies and gentlemen. We can't prove a correlation. And because there's no correlation between the death penalty and the deterrent effect, once again, their general societal welfare point does not stand. And because, ladies and gentlemen, all in all, the point remains that the death penalty, with its endemic systemic flaws, undermines the very aims of justice that we want to uphold, ladies and gentlemen. No matter what, we do not support the death penalty.
What has this debate been about today? The human's most basic right to live. Now, both sides have agreed that this indeed is a very sanctified, basic, essential, extreme right. However, what has the difference been? Why is there clash in this debate today? Because the proposition is saying that taking away this right can be justified in these certain cases of mass murder and war crimes. The opposition have supposed to tell us why it can never be justified to take away this right to live. What have they done? They have shown us in several examples that maybe it won't be. Maybe if we had made a mistake and indeed he is innocent, or maybe that in this place it doesn't deter, and in this place society is protected anyway. However, we have showed you that when we look at the trend all over, when we look at the logic behind these things, these are the reasons it can indeed be justified in these certain cases. We've shown you that for the criminal himself, because we have the right to take away rights when indeed the criminal violates these rights, and because of this extreme absolute violation, it's justified to take away this right. We've shown you because we have a responsibility to deter future crimes, and because we have a responsibility to protect society against these horrible, horrific people that we are discussing, therefore, it is justified. We have told you that because we have the responsibility to provide the victims with consolation, this closure where they can turn their lives around and know that this person who has ruined their lives is out of the way. Because of that, it is justified. Now, ladies and gentlemen, even if one of these have stand, which all of them have stand at the end of the debate, I will show you why. But even if only one, we have showed you that it indeed can be justified. Now, what have they showed us? They have showed us that in several rare situations, this doesn't stand. These situations that stand out from the regular cases. Cases that it doesn't necessarily deter, or that society was protected anyway, without the death penalty. But the fact is that there are other reasons behind this non-deterrence and behind the protection that is there anyway. And then in most cases, we have proved that it will increase protection. Why? Because once the criminal is gone, there is no chance he will threaten society again. When he is in jail, there are still chances. And because when he knows he's going to die, ladies and gentlemen, that is the most deterrent thing. They have told us that there is legal recognition, that the death penalty should not be instituted. Who has showed us that this legal recognition is going in the right direction? We have showed you why it is not going in the right direction and why we have a responsibility and a need for society. They have said that we are stooping to the level of the criminal. Well, you know what? We have a right to stoop to this level. When we are worrying about society and the victims, how moral is the government being when they are endangering society, ladies and gentlemen? They have told us that deterrence, through these random examples, has not indeed, will not deter because these war criminals are in a different state of mind. But we have shown you that criminals in general no one wants to die, ladies and gentlemen. Death is the most deterring thing. That is what we have proved. And they told us that it was irreversible. But who has proved that wanting to reverse war criminals and mass murders is practical at all? They have not shown us this, ladies and gentlemen. So what is this case really about? What we have shown you is that the degree of these crimes requires this death penalty and justifies this death penalty. The need to protect society justifies it. The need to deter future crime justifies it. The need to console society and the need to console these victims. And what stands against this? The moral problem that they have presented. But how is morality judged? Morality should be judged on humanity's best interests, on how protected they are, and on what morals we indeed do base our society, and why these morals that we have shown you show us that it is justified.